fear, no doubt, trust in the Lord. Cut away, make your heart restore. Heavy load we carry long, but His light go make us strong. No more running, no disguise. Circumcise your heart, arise. No be strength, no be might. Nice hand, they show the light. Step by step, we hold on tight. Faith go guide us through the night. No wahala, we go there. No fear, no shaker. Faith go guide us through the night. Your time is santan. Bine to back over the night. Bine to get baby vision. Tap to meet this rent. No more money, no vision. Keep on a cocaine and qua. No more manji reptila. Keeping so near a man. My bedroom. Oh, Vibekele. No fear, no doubt, trust in the Lord. Cut away, make your heart restore. Heavy load we carry long, but His light go make us strong. No more running, no disguise. Circumcise your heart, arise. No be strength, no be might. Nice hand, they show the light. Step by step, we hold on tight. Faith go guide us through the night. No wahala, we go there. No fear, no shake.
In 1790, the United States was a nation of contradictions. With a population of 4 million, it was home to more than 700,000 enslaved people and 32,000 free blacks. The Revolutionary War had just ended, and the new government was pressed to confront the problem of slavery. The Declaration of Independence had boldly proclaimed that all men are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yet these words sparked fierce debate among members of the Continental Congress, especially those from South Carolina, Georgia, and northern states, whose economies were deeply tied to the transatlantic slave trade. Thomas Jefferson's original draft of the Declaration had included a passage condemning the King of England for perpetuating the slave trade, but it was removed after intense opposition. The hypocrisy of fighting for liberty while denying it to nearly 700,000 enslaved people was impossible to ignore. Yet, slavery was deemed central to the new nation's economy and its ability to maintain the Union. In reality, slavery was expanding rapidly in the Deep South, fueled by the global demand for cotton and the forced migration of enslaved people through the domestic slave trade. From the onset of the Revolutionary War, the question of whether to arm blacks, enslaved or free, was hotly debated. Initially, General Washington and the Continental Congress excluded blacks from military service, fearing insurrection. But this policy changed rapidly after England issued an Emancipation Proclamation, offering freedom to any enslaved person willing to fight for the British Crown. The British presence in America had a profound impact on slavery. Wherever British troops went, enslaved people fled in large numbers. By 1783, it's estimated that nearly 80,000 enslaved people, about 1/5 of the enslaved population, had escaped to British lines. Faced with the prospect of losing even more enslaved laborers to the British, the Continental Congress reversed its policy. Free blacks who had already served faithfully in the army at Cambridge were allowed to enlist, and soon, most states, either through legislation or policy changes, began to enlist both free and enslaved blacks. In New England, enslaved African Americans were promised freedom in exchange for military service. By the end of the war, they made up 1/5 of the Northern Continental Army. After American independence, the revolutionary ideals of liberty and equality began to take root. Many states that had enlisted enslaved soldiers either freed them at the outset or promised manumission at the end of their service. The philosophy of revolution had a powerful effect on the minds of the people. Northern states began passing laws to gradually abolish slavery. Vermont led the way in 1779, followed by Massachusetts in 1780, where a judicial decision effectively ended slavery. Pennsylvania enacted gradual emancipation the same year, and by 1784, Connecticut and Rhode Island had passed similar laws. New York and New Jersey followed suit by 1803. At the same time, across the Caribbean, the Haitian Revolution erupted, the first and only successful slave revolt in modern history. Enslaved Africans in Saint-Domingue rose up, defeated Napoleon's army, and established the world's first black republic in 1804. This victory sent shockwaves across the Americas. It inspired free and enslaved Africans alike and gave abolitionists a living example that freedom wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. With the international slave trade outlawed, the demand for enslaved labor didn't disappear, it shifted. In the United States, a new brutal system intensified: the domestic slave trade. Enslaved people were no longer imported from Africa. They were bred, bought, and sold within the country. Families were torn apart. Men, women, and children were forced into coffles and marched south to the cotton fields of the Deep South. This was the cruel paradox of abolition. Ending the transatlantic slave trade didn't end slavery, it entrenched it. It turned human beings into commodities, their bodies into profit, and it exposed the contradictions at the heart of a nation founded on freedom. The trade didn't stop, it just went underground. Illegal slave smuggling surged, with ships sneaking enslaved people into the US under cover of darkness. Abolition, it seemed, was not the end of slavery. It was just the beginning of a new, more insidious chapter. Abolitionist organizing began almost immediately after the war. In 1787, British reformers founded the Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade, launching one of the first international movements against slavery. That same year, American Quakers and reformers established the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, the first anti-slavery organization in the United States. These early efforts led to major legal changes. Britain banned the transatlantic slave trade in 1807, and the United States followed suit in 1808, the earliest year allowed under a constitutional clause written in 1787. Thousands of black soldiers had fought in the Revolutionary War, hoping to earn their freedom. Many were manumitted in the North, and from this emerged the first significant free black communities in cities like Philadelphia, Boston, and New York. These communities quickly became centers of black intellectualism, resistance, and self-determination. Freemen's schools, mutual aid societies, and independent churches promoted literacy, leadership, and collective action. To be educated and black in this period was to be an abolitionist, and was both expected and inherited. Education was more than a personal achievement. It was a political declaration. In a society built on denying black humanity, literacy itself became an act of resistance. Black children were taught that knowledge carried a burden and a purpose. To learn was to fight, to speak truth to power, and to lift your people. Whether in pulpits, print shops, or classrooms, educated black men and women were shaped not just to succeed, but to serve as torchbearers in the struggle for freedom. There had never been an intellectual and political activist movement quite like this before, not in the West, and not led by people so systematically dehumanized. Across ancient and modern history, enslaved peoples had rebelled, resisted, or fled, but never had they launched a coordinated, multi-generational intellectual uprising, built on institutions they created themselves. This was not simply a revolt or a revolution. It was a cultural renaissance born in captivity. Black abolitionism in America fused scholarship, theology, journalism, grassroots organizing, and ancestral defiance into a single movement. What began as survival and protest evolved into a sweeping campaign to redefine freedom itself, driven by a people long denied their most basic rights. The world had never seen anything like it, and has not seen anything like it since. In 1816, Richard Allen founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church, AME, the first independent black denomination in the United States. The AME Church soon became a hub of black spiritual life, education, and political organizing. Abolitionist thinkers and leaders began to emerge from these communities. James Forten, Prince Hall, and Maria W. Stewart helped lay the foundations for a new generation. The first black-owned newspaper, Freedom's Journal, launched in 1827 and gave voice to black writers and activists across the North. These institutions produced the first wave of free abolitionist leaders, a new generation of thinkers and activists who included Henry Highland Garnet, Alexander Crummell, and Martin Delany. As black resistance grew, so did white backlash. slaveholders and their sympathizers fought not only to maintain the institution of slavery, but also to suppress the growing intellectual and political awakening among black communities. They feared the spread of abolitionist ideas and took deliberate steps to keep the enslaved uninformed. Laws were passed banning black literacy and education, prohibiting gatherings of enslaved people, and outlawing the possession or distribution of abolitionist materials. These measures were not only acts of repression, they were attempts to erase the very existence of the movement. Free black people were also harassed, monitored, and intimidated. Their schools, churches, and political gatherings were often targeted with threats or violence, especially in border states and the South. Authorities sought to criminalize their activism and delegitimize their leadership, to control enslaved minds and isolate the free black community was seen as just as important as controlling their labor. Rebellions and plots like Gabriel's Rebellion in 1800, Denmark Vesey's Plan in 1822, and Nat Turner's Uprising in 1831 only intensified this panic. In response, Southern legislatures expanded surveillance and severely punished anyone who resisted. But repression only intensified the struggle. In the 1830s, the national abolitionist movement exploded. In 1829, David Walker published The Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World, a searing document urging black people to resist slavery by any means necessary. In 1831, William Lloyd Garrison launched The Liberator, a radical newspaper demanding immediate emancipation. Around the same time, Frederick Douglass escaped from slavery and quickly rose to become one of the most powerful voices in the movement. The Underground Railroad emerged as a direct response to this growing urgency. Though it had existed in informal forms since the 1790s, it became a powerful and organized force in the 1840s and 1850s. Quakers like Isaac T. Hopper helped build early networks in Philadelphia, but it was William Still, a free black man and leader in the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society, who became known as the father of the Underground Railroad. Still documented the stories of hundreds of fugitives, preserving names, routes, and reunions in what would later become a priceless historical record. Harriet Tubman, who escaped slavery in 1849, soon returned to the South repeatedly to lead dozens of others to freedom. She worked closely with Still's network, risking her life with each journey. By the 1850s, the Underground Railroad was at its peak. Families, churches, and abolitionist allies throughout the North worked together in defiance of federal law, helping thousands escape the system that had defined American life since its founding. The abolitionist movement was not a gift granted by others. It was built by black communities, rooted in centuries of resistance, and carried forward by men and women who refused to accept a freedom that excluded them. From schools and churches to ships and newspapers, every front was a battleground, and through it all, black leadership remained at the heart of the fight to end slavery in America. While Christianity was the foundation for many abolitionist arguments, it was also the faith most deeply entangled in justifying slavery. From early on, abolitionists pointed to the teachings of Christ, love, mercy, and the equality of all souls, as evidence that slavery was a moral abomination. Yet, for centuries, that same religion had been weaponized to uphold human bondage. The contradiction was stark, a gospel of liberation used to bless oppression. To understand the moral force behind the Christian abolitionist movement, we must first confront how the church helped shape and preserve the system of slavery itself. Unlike missionaries, Southern planters initially had little interest in the religious arguments used to justify slavery. Some clergy claimed that slavery gave Africans the chance to be saved, but planters feared that Christian teachings might inspire hope, resistance, or even demands for freedom. They worried that exposing enslaved people to ideas of spiritual equality could disrupt the social order. It wasn't until the Church of England officially declared that a slave's baptism or conversion did not entitle them to freedom, insisting that all enslaved people must still serve for life, that planters began to reconsider. Over time, many came to see religion not as a threat, but as a tool. When sermons emphasized obedience, submission, and divine reward for suffering. Christianity was no longer seen as dangerous. It became useful for maintaining control. Still, even with the assurance that conversion would not entitle a slave to freedom, many masters resisted giving religious instruction. They feared it would diminish the slave's economic value. As Carter G. Woodson described in The History of the Negro Church, 1921, slaveholders argued that Africans were too brutish to be taught. Linguistic and cultural barriers between African-born slaves and English colonists contributed to this resistance, leading missionaries to focus primarily on children and American-born slaves. Some planters went further, claiming racial inferiority, that Africans were incapable of instruction, not merely due to language or culture, but by nature. They enacted strict laws against educating slaves and violently intimidated those who tried to teach free blacks to read and write, even into the 20th century. Masters feared the egalitarianism implicit in Christianity. They worried it would disrupt the master-slave hierarchy and inspire insurrection. Even worship alongside black people, sharing communion or space in church, was unacceptable. Many whites declared black slaves were soulless beasts. Some even questioned whether they could go to heaven. For both the enslaved and the free, the Bible became more than a book. It became a mirror. In its pages, they saw the struggle of an oppressed people chosen by God, delivered from bondage by divine justice. The story of the Israelites under Pharaoh was not distant history. It was their story. The cries of Moses to "Let my people go" echoed across southern plantations and northern pulpits alike. Enslaved Africans and educated black thinkers alike drew strength from these striking parallels, seeing in the Bible not a justification for their chains, but a roadmap to liberation. This sacred connection gave rise to the Negro spirituals, songs of sorrow, survival, and hope that carried secret meanings and encoded messages. These were not just hymns of worship, but quiet acts of resistance. Through lyrics drawn from scripture and steeped in suffering, enslaved people claimed their place in the story of God's people. "Go down, Moses," "Swing low, sweet chariot," and "Wade in the water" were cries of both faith and freedom, a defiant hope that deliverance was coming. Even as slaveholders twisted scripture to maintain power, black preachers, abolitionists, and everyday believers redefined the gospel for themselves, transforming it into a theology of resistance, hope, and eventual deliverance. This faith, born under the weight of oppression but lit by the fire of truth, would become the soul of the abolitionist movement. It would inspire generations to fight, not just for freedom, but for justice, to claim, at last, the sacred promise that all people are created equal in the eyes of God. Thanks for watching. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue uncovering the hidden truths of history. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and we'll see you in the next video.